Salutations and welcome to the Anti-Federalist Project. I am your host, Jacob Solt, and what precedes is my attempt to humbly add to the historical understanding of those commonly referred to as the Anti-Federalists and their ideological context. I am creating this video to fill a need that I perceive from my experience with the Twitter feed mentions of the Anti-Federalists. It seems that many middle and high school students are given the assignment each year to write an essay or construct debating points or answer questions about the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists. This short video is my attempt to help such students attend to their studies. The debate between the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists all concern whether the state ratifying conventions should ratify the Constitution or not ratify the Constitution. Before the Constitution was ratified and became law, the individual states after the American Revolution were confederated, or said another way, the individual American states after the American Revolution were joined together in a league or team of friendship, whose forming document they called the Articles of Confederation. When I say states here in this video, I am referring to the commonly recognized state legislatures and related political power structures. By 1787, after over 6 years under the Articles of Confederation, most people, with a few exceptions, thought that the Articles of Confederation had some serious problems. If you want to know more about the Articles of Confederation, then you can go to my video on the Articles of Confederation here. The Articles of Confederation were considered by most to be flawed and needing changes. And so, therefore, the state legislatures appointed representatives to convene or meet to amend or change the Articles of Confederation. This convention delegated to discuss and debate the most appropriate amendments, additions, or changes to the Articles of Confederation convened in Philadelphia in 1787 at Independence Hall. If you would like to know more about the Philadelphia Convention, or as it is alternatively known as a Constitutional Convention or Federal Convention, you can go here to see my video on that. This Philadelphia Convention quickly realized that there was no way that they could actually change the Articles of Confederation. Under the Articles of Confederation, there had to be a unanimous consent of all the state legislatures to make a change to those Articles of Confederation. Those at the Philadelphia Convention realized that they had too much disagreement between themselves to come to a unanimous conclusion about what changes might be appropriate to the Articles of Confederation. So many of those at the Philadelphia Convention decided to ignore the Articles of Confederation completely and design a whole new system of governance for the American states. Some of the delegates of the Philadelphia Convention left when they heard that the Articles of Confederation were going to be ignored. But the ones who stayed in Philadelphia through to the end of the convention ended up drafting a new constitution. And constitution is a fancy word meaning a written instrument embodying the rules of a political or social organization, or the mode in which a state or society is organized, which describes how this newly invented government of the federal states was to be constructed and organized. An important feature of this new constitution is that unanimous consent of the states was not required to ratify or approve of the new constitution. Only 9 of the 13 states were required to ratify in order for the Constitution to qualify itself as the supreme law of the land. The remaining delegates to the Constitutional Convention submitted their new Constitution to the state ratifying conventions for ratification or approval. Between the time when the Constitution was submitted to the state ratifying conventions in September 1787 and the time when the Constitution was actually ratified, we will call it July 1788, this was the time when there would emerge the debate between the people that we will call the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists. At the time, most people favored the word federal or federalism, and it was considered to be a good thing to be a Federalist. The term confederate means to band together or to join a league of mutual support or common action. People liked the word federal because it meant that their state governments were not going to change, that the federal government was only going to be the government that your state government was going to participate in for mutual aid between states or common action or need between states. Those persons who wanted to ratify the Constitution called themselves Federalists because they knew that generally people liked the term federal and respected it. And after they claimed the title of Federalist for themselves, they called those who didn't support the Constitution and its ratification as the Anti-Federalists, because they were against the Federalists. In reality, however, the Anti-Federalists generally argued for a truly federal government that preserved state sovereignty, and it was the Federalists that generally argued for a national government that had some federal likeness or federal characteristics. I feel that there's two general referents of both the word Federalist and the word Anti-Federalist, which can make things confusing. When we say Federalists, we mean either one of two things. Either we mean it to say all those who wanted the Constitution to be ratified or supported the ratification of the Constitution, or we mean the authors of the Federalist Papers, which is much more specific. And those authors would be James Madison, the most significant architect of the actual Constitution's language, and Alexander Hamilton, who was an important confidant of George Washington and who would later be significant in forming of a national bank. In the same way, when we say Anti-Federalists, we either mean anyone who opposed the ratification of the Constitution, or we mean specific Anti-Federalist authors who wrote essays to be printed in public newspapers and going by the pseudonyms such as Brutus or Federal Farmer or Columbian Patriot. So the Federalists supported the ratification of the Constitution, and the Anti-Federalists argued against the ratification of the Constitution. Why did the Federalists support the Constitution? Well, the Federalists wanted the Constitution to be ratified because they wanted a strong central government that could regulate and control interstate issues and concerns. The Federalists wanted the central government to have the power to tax, which the central government did not have under the Articles of Confederation. The Federalists wanted the central government that would be able to correct what the Federalists saw as the deficits or weaknesses of the Articles of Confederation, and they wanted the strong central government to be able to borrow money, coin money, and pay back all of the central government's loans and bonds and debts that were acquired during the American Revolutionary War, which the states had thus far been slow to pay up with. Therefore, the Federalists focused on the deficits and weaknesses of the Articles of Confederation, and secondly, on the importance and usefulness of a strong central government, and thirdly, that the Constitution specifically recommended a plan that would provide a useful union to the states, and that it corrected the problems with the Articles of Confederation. In Federalist Paper number 1, Alexander Hamilton says that a series of topics should be discussed when deliberating on whether this Constitution should be ratified, and he mentions these 6. The utility of the Union, or the usefulness of being united is another way of saying that. The insufficiency of the Articles, about like the weaknesses or deficits of the Articles of Confederation. He talks about a minimum energetic government requirement, that government should have the power to do stuff, that a government tied down by lacking the legal power to do things that governments are supposed to do is nonsensical. And that 4, the true principles of Republican government, which is another way of saying that government should ultimately derive all of its powers from the consent of the great mass of people, and the government should be administered by the delegates or representatives that the people shall elect. 5, the analogy of the proposed Constitution to the state governments or state constitutions. That is to say that the Constitution was modeled after many of the state constitutions. Therefore, there is little to fear in this Constitution. Since no one is suggesting that there is a problem with their own state's constitution, there should be no fear with this Constitution that's being proposed. And 6, that the added security to Republican government, to liberty and to property provided by the Constitution. Here, Hamilton is arguing that the Constitution protects the people by uniting the states and protects liberty and property by settling interstate disagreements and petty squabbles between states. Here, I would like to take a few of my precious seconds and again credit Gordon Lloyd, the man, the myth, the legend, the creator of the best stuff on the entire internet about the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists. And I would suggest that if you want a lot of detailed information on pretty much everything Federalists and Anti-Federalists on the World Wide Web, go to teachingamericanhistory.org/Fed Anti-Fed, and there's a link at the bottom of the screen now. And okay, enough of my gushing on Mr. Lloyd. So, if Alexander Hamilton and James Madison wanted the states to ratify the Constitution, the obvious question that comes up is, who were those crazy anti-federalist guys, and why could they have what could they have possibly argued against the Constitution? Don't we all know the Constitution is great and wonderful and all sorts of good stuff? Well, an important, no, a critical thing to remember about the Constitution at this point is that there was no Bill of Rights. There was no explicit protection or declaration of what rights a person under this new Constitution had. The states had their own state constitutions, and those constitutions, in those, there were listings of rights. Each of those constitutions had bills of rights that, within those states, people had a legal guarantee to. But under this new Constitution, there was no such Bill of Rights. The Anti-Federalists were against the Constitution for a lot of reasons, but perhaps the most important reason is that they saw that the Constitution as giving a lot of power to a central government, but not having any protection or legal guarantee of rights to the people living under that Constitution. Unlike Hamilton and Madison, who worked together on the Federalist Papers, the Anti-Federalist writings were uncoordinated, and they were written by many, many authors, and having considerable variation or difference in what they thought was important and how they wanted to make their arguments. Because there were so many different people with their own views on the Constitution, there is not going to be time in such a short video to get into all the hairy details of the Anti-Federalists, but I'll give you a few more of their thematic objections to the Constitution, which should be helpful on most school projects. Remember, if you want to know more, you can see my other videos on the Anti-Federalists, and also, again, there is teachingamericanhistory.org. The Anti-Federalists were suspicious of a strong central government, because a strong central government is the kind of government that has the strength to abuse or oppress the people it is supposed to serve. Those who we commonly refer to as the Anti-Federalists wanted a weaker central government. They would have liked to have seen a weak federal government. And remember, the name Anti-Federalist is given to them by those who adopted the name Federalist, but that doesn't mean that the Anti-Federalists were really against federalism. It means that that's what their opponents wanted you to think, or wanted people to think at the time. The Anti-Federalists wanted a weak federal government whose powers were specifically written down and specifically defined, so it would be clear whenever the central government went beyond its powers. They saw language in the Constitution, like the necessary and proper clause of the Constitution, which said, "The Congress shall have power to make all laws which shall be necessary and proper for carrying into execution the foregoing powers, and all other powers vested by this Constitution in the government of the United States, or in any department or officer thereof." So, from the perspective of the Anti-Federalists, this meant that Congress could have the power to do anything that it deemed necessary and proper. Imagine for a minute if your parents were given the power to do whatever they felt was necessary and proper to fulfill their parental duties for the rest of your life. Or imagine if your parents had the authority for the rest of your life to do anything that they thought was in the best interest of your general welfare. Now you can begin to see why the Anti-Federalists didn't like the idea of a strong central government that could do anything that it deemed necessary and proper, or anything that contributed to an ambiguous general welfare. And with this kind of ambiguous language within the Constitution, you can see why that the so-called Anti-Federalists, it was so important for them to have a Bill of Rights. A Bill of Rights would spell out what the central government couldn't do. Not only was the wording of the Constitution troublesome to the Anti-Federalists, They thought that the behavior of the Federalists was very suspicious. Remember, the Constitutional Convention was held in secret. And now that the Constitution has been sent to the states to be ratified, the Federalists are using the language of crisis, and that it was critically important to ratify this Constitution as quickly as possible. If a car salesman says he'll offer you this car for $5,000, but you have to sign this contract right now or he'll take back the offer, the best advice I can give you is don't sign. High-pressure sales are aimed at getting you to do something now that you wouldn't do if you had more time to think about it. And the Anti-Federalists frequently made this argument, that for something as important as a constitution of a central government, we should take our time and think about it. That such things wouldn't have been done in secret and then pushed for so quickly unless there was some kind of conspiracy at work. For instance, the Anti-Federalist writer Sentinel said, "All of the blessings of liberty and the dearest privileges of free men are now at stake and dependent on your present conduct." He cautions people to beware of the artful and designing men who advocate for good government, for what they really might be selling is a permanent aristocracy, and that hurrying the states to make a decision to ratify is the argument of tyrants. So to recap, the Anti-Federalists, they wanted a weak federal government, a government where the states retained their state sovereignties but confederated to solve corporate problems. And secondly, the Anti-Federalists wanted a Bill of Rights that said what rights the people had and what the government absolutely could not violate. The Anti-Federalists, thirdly, wanted more specific language in the Constitution. They did not like this lack of specificity and this indefiniteness of the General Welfare Clause and the Necessary Proper Clause and the implications of the Supremacy Clause. And they wanted a full debate and discussion instead of a hurried attempt to get the Constitution ratified. As I said before, the Anti-Federalists were remarkably varied in what they wanted and argued for. And if you want to know more about what they said, full transcripts of their letters are at teachingamericanhistory.org/ratification. Or if you want to know more about the implicit ideology and philosophy behind the Anti-Federalists, see my videos on YouTube by the user Anti-Federalist Theory. Or if you're really short on time, you can download the audio version of this video to your iPod on iTunes by subscribing to the Anti-Federalist Project podcast and listening to it on the go. I am Jacob Solt, this is the Anti-Federalist Project, and thank you so much for watching.